Episode 11 is now the official beginning point of the Jaune Arc, though by now we've spent considerably more time with RWBY as a team to justify this, 90 minutes compared to the original show's 60. Technically speaking, this arc has been roughly doubled in size, from 20 minutes to 40, but this also doesn't accurately reflect the involvement RWBY will play in things coming forward, which lowers that number back down to roughly 20 minutes of focus across a 4-episode span. A few days have passed from the duel between RWBY and Weiss, which is the topic of the day between Juniper, Blake, and Yang. Apparently the relationship between the two, and indeed Weiss and the rest of the team, has bottomed out, leading RWBY to drown herself in video games and Weiss to bury herself in her studies in order to avoid interacting with each other. John makes some kind of remark about the duel itself, either innocuous or sarcastic, and Yang responds by pointing out how in their partner spar, Pyrrha won in under 30 seconds. We even get to see a brief clip of the fight to demonstrate the monumental difference in skill. Pyrrha, being kindly and having the first inklings of her being smitten with John, tries to defend him, but John rebuffs everyone, claiming that he was just off his game for the day. Calling his bluff, Yang and Nora dare John to challenge Carden on the next sparring day. He accepts, and Pyrrha asks if that's really a wise decision, to which he responds that he's not afraid. Wipe cut to John in the arena across from Carden, double guessing his course of action. We see a more extensive rendition of the fight between the two, with inklings of John's tactical nature showing through in order to keep him afloat, but it's apparent that Carden's raw skill and strength outmatch him by miles. Summarily defeated, John goes off to tend to his injured pride. Pyrrha, of course, drags him off to the roof, and this is where she offers to help him. He takes offense and finally admits that in order to pursue his family name and tradition, he forged transcripts and got his way into Beacon. He defends himself, pointing out that he's genuinely been trying to catch up, a fact that we've seen as a background detail in a number of previous episodes, and that he doesn't need any help to get better. Pyrrha, disheartened and unwanted, leaves. With John alone on the roof, Carden reveals that this touching moment happens right above his room, and begins to extort John with the newly revealed truth. Episode 12 focuses on the fallout of Carden finding out John's secret, with John run ragged during his classes. He's even so tired that when called upon by Oobleck in history class, he gives the asinine answer about binoculars. Of course, none of his friends know what's going on, and the audience only have an inkling of what's caused the previously attentive John to suddenly become lackluster in class, and it only comes to light for the audience when Carden pulls him aside and casually orders John to do the homework for tomorrow for all of Team Cardinal. His friends show concern during lunch, but he shrugs them off, heading back to the dorm in order to get started on the obscene workload that he has ahead of him. Yang voices her concern to Pyrrha, who is also uneasy and equally confused, but feels too polite to pry. Yang huffs in frustration that it hasn't even been a single semester and their friends group is already going through a massive bout of drama. Sick of it, she states the intent to bring them all close together personally, a notion that Pyrrha counters by saying getting involved would just complicate the drama. Yang brushes off the assertion and tries to get Blake's solidarity on the issue, only for Blake to be distracted watching Carden torture Velvet. Catching this, Yang and Pyrrha both agree that people like Carden are trash and there's nothing any of them can really do. Nora of course suggests breaking his legs, but Yang and Pyrrha note that it would get them suspended if not expelled. Blake, however, bites back, asking why stopping bullying would be a bad thing. To everyone's surprise, Weiss walks up to the lunch table and weighs in, noting her own bafflement that Faunus are even allowed to attend Beacon in the first place. Some more vaguely racist remarks from Weiss and some barbs between her, Blake, and Yang later, and tensions at the table have risen. This tension is capped when RWBY arrives with her own lunch. She and Weiss have a momentary glare-off before Weiss huffs and goes to find more suitable company. RWBY sits with them, though only pecks at her food, saying she heard Glinda was looking into a possible transfer. While Yang thought that this news might make RWBY happy, RWBY laments that when they worked together in the forest she felt a connection with Weiss, like they really could work well together. As much as they've been at each other's throats, RWBY got the feeling that there was more to Weiss and she was hopeful that there might be a breakthrough eventually. She doesn't give anyone time to respond and says she's not hungry, going off to finish the next level of one of her games. Before she leaves, she confirms with Blake that the two of them are going to go shopping the following day for the Forever Fall class trip. The scene ends with Yang inviting Blake and the latter some of Juniper out for a party since it's Friday, to take some of the edge off. All of them decline. Well, Ren turns down for Nora, and Yang remarks it's their loss and goes out to get ready for a night partying and boozing. Episode 13 unfolds in Vale with Ruby and Blake shopping for camping supplies. They're heading for an expedition to Fairer Fall, and their grades in the survival class end up dictating their budget for supplies in order to teach them the importance of learning and success in the profession, leaving the struggling Team RWBY quite strapped for cash. For all the stress being put on them, though, the two are in oddly high spirits, able to bond over a number of different book series that they talk about while they shop for camping equipment at a local store. Blake is even surprised when Ruby mentions some of her choices, as they convey much darker themes than Ruby initially seemed to be able to handle, which calls back to her "life isn't like a fairy tale" line. Ruby goes a bit deeper into her own musings on the subject. She loves old stories, but when she looked them up herself, she often found the originals and not the modern versions taught to kids, which opened her eyes to how scary the world can be. However, she looked to how each story was pacified for younger audiences and found an underlying truth in how something fun and enjoyable can be born from something more twisted. She looks at the world as something that is plagued by monsters, and people like Huntsman are the force that will slowly change that reality into a more fun and friendly one. Admittedly, she doesn't articulate this quite as well, as she's still not 100% able to comprehend her own thought process, but Blake learns to respect the surprising amount of maturity Ruby has. She challenges Ruby, asking if Weiss being so difficult to work with is analogous to her musings, and Ruby admits that she never really thought the process would ever necessarily be easy. And to contribute to that, Weiss is really just the first indication that this is the kind of world she'll be having to work within in order to change it in the first place. Meanwhile, a hungover Yang is slapped awake by Coco, who chides her for even getting drunk when the rest of her team was already in disarray. As she explains, her and Velvet found the blonde in a gutter while out on a morning jog and dragged her back to their room. Yang feebly tries to shove Coco and the rest of Team Coffee away, but is too impaired to be effective. Yang laments that there's nothing she can do and that she took Pyrrha's words to heart. Getting involved would just spur on more drama, so she tried to drown her woes in booze and hope it goes away, something she picked up on from her uncle. Yatsuhashi is about to say something when Coco slaps her again, berating her that, sure, jumping in at the wrong moment will just make things more messy, but jumping in at the precise right moment she needs to can go miles towards solving an issue. There's some more bickering back and forth between the two before Yang decides to go to sleep on the advice in her dorm. Back shopping, Blake and Ruby split up, only for Ruby to run into Penny, who happily joins in on the equipment hunt. Along the way, they find Pyrrha, doing much the same, but who is also worriedly looking for John, who she lost while shopping downtown. Flip over to Blake, where she runs into John. The boy is looking for rapier wasps like Corden demanded he do. Looking at Blake and recalling her stealthy nature, paired possibly with some good comedic clips of her doing her best ninja impressions, John strikes up a plan and pulls her aside, asking for her help with something sensitive. Blake is resistant until he mentions getting back at Corden and getting him off his back. With a grudge against the bully, Blake ends the episode asking what John needed her to do. Episode 14 comes the exciting conclusion to the Jaune Arc, with all the teams camping in Forever Fall for Professor Peach's survival course. Glinda, one of the other chaperones, explains the day's assignments of gathering sap and leaves the teams to do the work. She pulls Weiss and Ruby aside and explains that while they are making unusual preparations to swap teams, the two are still partners for the interim and should work together as amicably as possible. Ruby takes the suggestion seriously, and when Weiss makes a dry quip about Ruby, Ruby manages to stomach it peacefully. Ruby asks Weiss to take the lead since she doesn't want to cause friction. Weiss haughtily accepts the suggestion and begins doling out instructions while Blake and Yang watch. Later in the episode, though, we see inklings of friendship between the two, moments where Weiss lets her guard down that are brief background details that astute viewers might be able to pick up on. We cut to Team Cardinal, who are lounging around while John does all the work. However, John only comes back with a few filled jars, enough for him and his own team but not for Cardinal. Cardin is of course livid, but John attempts to stand up to him. However, before he can hit Cardin with the trump card that he's been building up, he's dragged off to fulfill Cardin's master plan, coating Pyrrha in sap and unleashing the wasps on her. However, John turns on him, coating him in sap instead. Enraged, Cardin and his team beat John, only to be interrupted when an Ursa, attracted by the sap, arrives. All but Cardin and John scatter, with Cardin trying to fend off the beast only to lose his mace over a cliffside. Russell, knowing Blake saved him at the initiation, begs Blake and her team to go save Cardin. Blake is visibly tempted to refuse, but decides to help when she hears John screaming as well. She calls for Ruby, Weiss, Yang, and Pyrrha, who all rush to help. Nora by this point is unconscious from eating too much sap and has passed out, leaving Ren to make sure she's safe. RWBY quickly assesses the situation and puts Blake, Yang, and Pyrrha on guard at the perimeter of the clearing, which Weiss objects to, saying they should just rush it at the same time. RWBY snaps back at Weiss, having slipped into full leader mode, and telling the girl just to do as she says. As this is going on, Carden uses a jar of sap to try and attack the Ursa. Sadly, all he succeeds in doing is covering it in goo. However, this prompts John to grab his own jar and opens it in order to lure the Grimm away from Carden. RWBY explains that she's going to knock the bear off the cliff and she needs a boost from one of Weiss's glyphs in order to give her the extra oomph for the kick. All they need is an opening. Both John and Pyrrha hear this, and John immediately sprints for the cliff, acting as bait. The Ursa goes for him and gives them that opening. RWBY launches forward and John barely manages to dodge out of the way, with Pyrrha demonstrating her semblance by dragging him the few extra inches to safety. Instead of RWBY seeing this happen, it's Yang that asks about her semblance, and we get to the fact that it's polarity. With the Ursa push off the cliff, Weiss chews RWBY out for her plan, but RWBY stands up for herself and defends her actions. It wasn't Ursa Major that attacked, which are primarily solo hunters, but if she were wrong and it was just a normal Ursa, then they would have to worry about a whole pack of them showing up later, in which case their strongest fighters were right there to hold the line. In addition, since she called it that it was a Major, none of their weapons would be able to pierce its hide, meaning the only way to deal with it would be to knock it off a cliff instead. Weiss is dumbfounded by RWBY's cunning, but more infuriated at being talked down to, so she stomps off. John helps Carden up and finally pops his trump card. He had a friend, heavily implied to be Blake, sneak in and swap out Carden's transcripts with forged replicas that John made from the originals, meaning John technically has the same blackmail wage over Carden's head as he has himself. They come to a mutual agreement to drop the blackmail and call it even, though animosity clearly still lingers between the two. The last scene is John on the rooftop with Pyrrha accepting her offer to train him. Thank you for watching Section 3 of Fixing RWBY Part 3. I'd love to give a big shout out to all of my wonderful patrons who have each helped this channel grow into what it is today. If you want to support the channel, please consider donating at patreon.com/CelticPhoenix. Remember, by donating $1 or more, you can get access to the Team Frostbite Discord server, where personalities like myself, FamtanFalling, and Tom Horan of Six Lick Productions regularly interact with our supporters. Please stick around for the next installment, and I'll catch you all on the flip side.